Hello, friends. Today I want to talk a little bit about Engelbert Kempfer and his history of Japan, translated from the German. And to do that, I first want to share his information from Wikipedia. So let's give that a try. There we are. Engelbert Kempfer, 1651 to 1716, was a German naturalist, physician, explorer, and writer known for his tour of Russia, Persia, India, Southeast Asia, and Japan between 1683 and 1693. He wrote two books about his travels. What's that? Aminitatum Exoticarum, published in 1712, is important for its medical observations and the first extensive description of Japanese plants, Flora Japonica. His History of Japan, published posthumously in 1727, was the chief source of Western knowledge about the country throughout the 18th and mid-19th centuries when it was closed to foreigners. Okay, so rather an important book. So he was born at Lemgo in the Principality of Lippe within the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. Travels and studies. There's a Japanese alphabet on the right side there. Court journey to the Shogun of Japan in 1691, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's more or less, obviously you can read all this yourself. But anyway, what we're going to look at today is this. The history of Japan, giving an account of the ancient and present state and government of that empire, of its temples, palaces, castles, and other buildings, of its metals, minerals, trees, plants, animals, birds, and fishes, of the chronology and succession of the emperors, ecclesiastical and secular. That's the emperor and the shogun, of course. Of the original descent, religions, customs, and manufactures of the natives, and of their trade and commerce with the Dutch and Chinese, together with a description of the Kingdom of Siam, written in High Dutch, that's Hochdeutsch, High German, by Engelbertus Kempfer, MD, physician to the Dutch embassy to the Emperor's court, and translated from his original manuscript, never before printed, by J.G. Scheuchzer, Fellow of the Royal Society and a member of the College of Physicians, London, with the life of the author and an introduction, illustrated with many copper plates, volumes 1 and 2, London, printed for the translator in 1727. All right. Good. So let's stop that share and go to the other share, which is the actual text. Now, I'm not proposing to read from the beginning of the book. I'm going to start with chapter 1 of book 4. Okay, as you can see on the right here, this is a PDF with 910 pages. It's a monster. But it is searchable, so that means it's quite easy to handle. So there we are, the History of Japan, Book 4, of Nagasaki, the place of residence for foreigners, of their trade, accommodation, etc. And note the S there looks a bit like an F, but that was the case in this period. So let's give it a try and see how we do. My philosophy here is you're going to make mistakes probably when you read, or I shall. But I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is making the effort and not being afraid of a text simply because it's old. So here we go. Chapter 1, of the situation of the city of Nagasaki and its harbor, as also of its public and private buildings. Amongst the imperial domains or crown lands are comprehended the Gokuja, as they call them, that is, the 5 chief maritime or trading towns in the empire. They are Miyako, that's Kyoto, the residence of the ecclesiastical hereditary emperor in the province, what's that? Yamashira. I think that's Yamashira. Yedo, the residence of the secular monarch, that's the shogun, in the province of Musashi. Osaka, in the province Setsu, sorry. Sakai in, what's that? Yasumi. And Nagasaki in Fisen. The four first are situate upon the great island Nippon, that's Honshu as we know it now, and all eminent for their wealth and riches as needs they must, considering the fruitfulness of the country about them, their manufactures and inland commodities, and many more considerable advantages, such as, for instance, the residence of the two imperial courts, the great number of strangers, and amongst them of many noblemen, princes, and lords who resort thither in their way to and from court, with great retinues. Nagasaki, on the contrary, the subject of my present consideration, is situate at the western extremity of the island Kyushu, upon an indifferent and barren soil between steep rocks and high mountains, remote from the populous and wealthy Nippon, Honshu, and almost shut up even against the commerce with foreign nations. So many disadvantages this city labours under make it but thinly inhabited by merchants, innkeepers, mercers, manufacturers, or other rich people. The greatest part of its inhabitants is made up by workmen, labourers, and ordinary people who must get their livelihood by their daily labour. However, the commodious and secure situation of its port makes it the common harbour for such foreign ships and people as are permitted to trade to Japan, to import foreign commodities, and to sell them to Japanese merchants who resort thither at certain times of the year from several parts of the empire. This particular favour and privilege is granted only to the Chinese or such Eastern nations as trade under their name, and to the Dutch, to both indeed with great restrictions and under a very narrow inspection. After that cruel persecution of the Christian religion, which, with the loss of many thousand natives of Japan, ended at last in its total extirpation about the year of Christ 1638, amongst many new laws which were then made, it was enacted by imperial authority that for the future the harbour of Nagasaki should be the only one open to foreigners, and that if any ship should be forced through distress of weather or otherwise to put in for shelter anywhere else, none of the crew should be allowed to set foot ashore, but that immediately upon the dangers blowing over, she should proceed on her voyage to Nagasaki under a convoy of Japanese guard ships, if needful, and show cause to the governor of that place why she put in elsewhere. The harbour begins to the north of the city. Its entrance is very small, and but a few fathom deep with a sandy bottom. Not far from it some rivers fall into the sea from the neighbouring mountains. It soon grows broader and deeper, and when it comes to be about half a mile broad and 5 to 6 fathom deep, it turns to the southwest, and so runs on between high land and mountains for about a mile, being all along about a quarter of a mile broad, more or less, till it reaches an island, or rather a mountain encompassed by the sea, and called Takayama or Takaboko, which is as much as to say bamboo's peak or high mountain of bamboos. Takeboko. Takayama or Takeboko. Right, take is bamboo. Right, got it. The Dutch call it Pappenberg. This latter denomination is grounded upon a fabulous story of some Roman Catholic priests said to have been thrown down that mountain into the sea in the time of the persecution. All the ships bound from Nagasaki to Batavia commonly ride at anchor near this island to watch an opportunity of getting out of the harbour, which could be easily done in 2 hours' time or thereabouts, were it not for the many banks, shoals, and cliffs which make the strait passage equally difficult and dangerous, and to avoid which ships must steer westwards, leaving the continent to the right, and so passing between some small islands get out to the main. Some bastions are built along the harbour, as it were, for defence, but they have no cannon. About half a mile from the town are two imperial guards opposite to one another and enclosed with palisades, I guess. They consist of about 700 men each, those taken in who do duty in their guard boats, which lie in the harbour both for its defence and to guard foreign ships riding at anchor. Near the Papenberg, where properly speaking the harbour begins, is a small island where the last Portuguese ship, which was sent from Macau to Japan, was burnt with all the goods on board about the year 1642. They call it ever since the burning place of hostile ships, having appointed it to be the constant place for the like executions hereafter. There are seldom less than 50 Japanese ships and boats in this harbour, besides some 100 fisher boats and other small boats. Of foreign ships, there are seldom, some few months in the winter excepted, less than 30, most of which are Chinese junks. The Dutch ships never stay longer than 3 months in autumn, nay, seldom so long, for about that time the south or west season or monsoon, which brought them to Japan, turns, and the north or northeast monsoon sets in, under favour of which they must return to Batavia or other places where they are bound to. The anchorage is at the end of the bay, within reach of the Imperial Guards, about a musket shot from the town, where ships ride at anchor upon a soft clay in about 6 fathom at high and 4.5 at low water. The town of Nagasaki, its harbour, and part of the adjacent country are represented in Table 19, copied in small from a very large map made by the Japanese themselves. Nagasaki lies in 32 degrees 36 minutes of north latitude and 151 degrees of longitude, at the end of the harbour where it is broadest, and where, turning north, it forms a near semicircular shore. It hath the shape of a half-moon, somewhat inclining to a triangle. It is built along the shore in a narrow valley which runs eastward, and is formed by the opening of the neighbouring mountains. It is about 3/4 of a mile long and nearly as broad, and the chief and broadest of its streets running almost so far up the valley. The mountains which encompass it are not very high, but steep, otherwise green up to their tops, and withal of a very pleasant and agreeable aspect. Just behind the city, in going up the mountains, are built many stately temples, beautifully adorned with fine gardens and terrace walks, according to the country fashion. Higher up are innumerable burying places, one behind another. Still further appear other higher mountains, fruitful and well cultivated. In short, the whole situation affords to the eye a most delicious and romantic view. The most remarkable places in the neighbourhood of Nagasaki are Fukahori, I suppose, in Japanese there, a pleasant village situate to the southwest, about 5 Japanese water leagues or 2 small German miles from the town. It hath a small fort or castle, the residence of a Bugyo, who governs the whole district for the Prince of Fisen as proprietor. The Daimyo, the prince, yeah. It affords a great quantity of firewood, and its yearly revenue amounts to nearly 3 mangoks, though in the general list of the revenues of the empire it is set down only at 1. Not far from this village is a great lake or pond. Seems to be a misprint there. Great is without the R. Great lake or pond, which is said to have this particular quality that, though surrounded with trees, there is never a leaf nor any dirty thing to be seen upon it. This they attribute to the great cleanliness and purity of the spirit under whose protection the pond stands, on which account they have such a high veneration for it that it is forbid under severe penalties to fish in it. To the north of Nagasaki lies the princely town and residence Omura, situate on a gulf and in the district of the same name. A few miles further eastwards lies the city Isafai, belonging to the Prince of Fisen, upon an arm of the Gulf of Shimabara. The town of Nagasaki itself is open, as most other towns in Japan, without either castle walls, fortifications, or indeed any other defense. The streets are neither straight nor broad, running uphill and ending near the temples. 3 freshwater rivers run through the town, which come down from the neighboring mountains. The middlemost and largest crosses the valley from east to west. For the greatest part of the year, they have scarce water enough to water some rice fields and to drive a few mills, though in rainy weather they are apt to increase so as to wash away whole houses. Plus ça change. There's plenty of floods these days as well, with similar results. Nagasaki hath obtained its name from its former lords, who had it in possession, along with its whole district of 3,000 koks yearly revenues from Nagasaki Kotari, the first of this name, through a succession of 12 of his lineal descendants to Nagasaki Seijimon. They still show at the top of a hill behind the town the ruins of their former residence. The last lord of Nagasaki, I mean the above-mentioned Nagasaki Seijimon, dying without issue about 200 years ago, it fell with the whole district to the Prince of Omura. The place where the town now stands was then nothing else but a poor miserable hamlet, the abode of some few fishermen, and was called Fukaye, or Irie, that is, the long bay, from the length of the harbour, as well as for distinction's sake from another village, situate not far off on the said harbour, and called Fukafori, which is as much as to say the long pond, which name it still retains. The new lord of Fukaye then thought fit to alter the name of this hamlet into that of Nagasaki, and 'twas owing entirely to his care and attention that in success of time it became a very considerable village or borough. Things continued upon this foot till some time after the first arrival of the Portuguese in Japan. This nation for some time enjoyed a free commerce upon the same terms with the Chinese, then likewise trading to these islands. For they were not bound to any particular harbour, but at liberty to put in wherever they pleased or thought it most convenient. Accordingly, they made diverse settlements in the island Saikoku, chiefly in the provinces Bungo and Fisen, and first of all in the province Fisen at a village called Fakuda, situate upon the island Firando, the Hirado, not far from the entrance of the harbour of Nagasaki, about 6 Japanese water leagues or 2 long German miles off this town. This place was under the jurisdiction of the Prince of Omura. Their next settlement was in the village Fukafori mentioned above. At these and all other places they ever settled at, they made 2 things the chief object of their care and attention. One was to carry on their trade and commerce, the other to propagate the Christian religion, and to set up the standard of our Saviour in this remote empire. They succeeded in both according to their best wishes. They prospered in their trade beyond expectation, and by their good conduct, which at first was humble and complaisant, they gained the hearts not only of the common people, but even of great men, the rather as there was some natural resemblance between the minds and inclinations of both nations. About that time, the Prince of Omura himself openly espoused the interest of the Christian religion, and invited the Portuguese to come and settle at Nagasaki, which place was then already grown up to a considerable village, consisting of about 23 streets, which now make up that part of the town called Uchimatsu, or the inner town, Uchimatsu, and containing in all 26 streets. In this condition it was delivered up by the said prince into the possession of the Portuguese, both for carrying on their trade and for propagating the gospel. Whether or no this was done by him with a real design to forward the advancement of the Christian religion, or rather with an intent to increase his revenues and to enrich his subjects by making this place, as it were, the centre of commerce and trade with foreigners, I will not take upon me to determine. Be this as it will, thus much is certain, that this new establishment soon proved in many respects very advantageous to this town. For the convenient and secure situation of its harbour, with several other advantages, invited also the Chinese to come up thither with their ships and goods, and the Japanese, allured by the prospect of gain, came to settle there in such numbers that the old town was not large enough to contain them. Therefore, new streets were built and named from the several provinces, towns, or boroughs their first inhabitants came from, as, for instance, Bungo Mats, or Bungo Machi, I think it must be, Yedo Machi, Kabashima Machi, Hirando Machi, that's Hirado Machi, Omura Machi, Shimabara Machi. Of course, but it's Shimabara, it's with a Z, not a CHI. So I suppose you might read that Shimabara Matsu, but I think it means Machi. Besides these, there are some other streets called bunts from one of the first members of this new colony who built them at his own expense. Thus, Nagasaki, formerly a mean and inconsiderable hamlet, became by degrees a wealthy and populous town, wherein there are now about 87 streets, all well inhabited. The flourishing condition and increasing wealth of the town of Nagasaki, when in possession of the Portuguese, soon afforded matter of jealousy and discontent to the court. Taiko, the then reigning secular monarch, reprimanded the Prince of Omura very severely for that he impudently parted with a place of that importance in favour of a foreign nation, and withal told him that seeing he was not fit to keep and to govern it any longer, he would annex it to his own dominions. The haughty conduct of the Portuguese contributed not a little to this resolution. Puffed up with pride and success, they pulled off the mask too soon, and thought it unbecoming the honour and gravity of their nation to pay so much deference and respect to the great men of the empire as they had formerly condescended to do. I was told by an old Japanese that the following incident, with many more of the like nature, very much incensed the emperor, and hastened his resolution to let the proud Portuguese feel the effects of his imperial displeasure. Taiko, to be nearer at hand to second his expedition into Korea, set up his court and residence for some time at Fakata, that's Hakata, yes. Okay, we're talking about Hideyoshi's invasion of Korea in 1590s, I think, yeah. One day, a Portuguese priest, meeting upon the road one of the principal councillors of state in his way to court, caused himself to be carried by without flopping or alighting from his chair, as is usual, without stopping, or alighting from his chair, as is usual in the country, nay, indeed, without showing him so much as common marks of respect and civility. It is easy to be imagined how much such a haughty and contemptible conduct provoked a man of his quality, for which reason he resolved, as soon as he should come to court, to acquaint the emperor with what had passed, which he did accordingly, and in the height of his resentment, made a most odious picture of the pride and haughtiness of the Portuguese nation in general, withal intimating how inconsistent it was with the emperor's schemes, and of how dangerous a consequence it might prove any longer to suffer these foreigners to enforce their interest and influence over his subjects, they having already gained too much. In short, whether the emperor was really displeased at the disrespect shown to his minister, or whether he looked upon the increasing prosperity of the Portuguese nation and the propagation of the Christian religion in general as detrimental to the peace and tranquillity of the empire, the indiscreet behaviour of this priest furnished him with a plausible pretext to let these foreigners experience the first proofs of his displeasure, to take away their town from them, and their patron the Prince of Omura, and besides to deprive the latter of its whole district and dependencies of 3,000 koks yearly revenues, which he annexed to his own dominions. Thus much of the town of Nagasaki in general. I proceed now to a more particular survey thereof. Nagasaki, or as it is sometimes pronounced, though not written, Nangasaki, is divided into two parts. One is called Uchimachi, or the inner town, consisting of 26 uh, what's that? Chu, 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 or streets, all very irregular as they had been built in the infancy of that town. The other is called Sotomatsu, Sotomachi, which is as much as to say the outward city, or as it might be otherwise expressed, the suburbs. This contains 61 streets, so that there are in all 87. That TSJ00, maybe Tsuji, I think, in modern Japanese anyway. The most remarkable public buildings in and about Nagasaki are some yanagura, as they call them, belonging to the emperor, being 5 large houses built of wood on the north side of the town on a low ground not far from the shore, where they keep 3 large imperial junks, or men of war, with all the tackle ready to be launched at command. Yenshogura, or the powder magazine, stands on the shore opposite to the town. For a greater security and to prevent ill accidents, they have built a large vault in a neighbouring hill where they keep the gunpowder. The palaces of the 2 residing governors, they take in a large spot of ground, standing something higher than the rest of the streets. The houses are very neat and handsome, all uniform and equally high. Strong gates and well guarded lead into the court. The 3rd governor lodges at Tateyama in a temple till his predecessor, by his departure for Yedo, makes him room in the palace. Besides the governor's palaces, there are about 20 other houses and spots of ground belonging to all the daimyo and some of the most eminent shomyo. Daimyo are lords of the 1st rank or princes of the empire, and shomyo all other lords of an inferior rank. Of the island Kyushu, or as it is otherwise called, Saikoks, that is the western country, wherein the town of Nagasaki lies. Some of their noblemen constantly reside there upon all occasions to take care of the affairs and interest of their principal, being answerable upon their return for what happens. If the daimyos or shomyos come up to Nagasaki themselves, the said houses serve to lodge them and their retinue. The foreigners live without the town in separate places where they are very narrowly watched and guarded, like persons suspected of ill practices. The Dutch live on a small island situated in the harbour, hard by the town, and called Deshima, that is the island De. The Chinese and neighbouring nations who profess the same religion and trade under the same name live behind the town at the southern extremity of it upon a rising ground. Their habitations are encompassed with a wall and are called Yakujin, or the Physic Garden, from what they were formerly as also Jusenshu, from the imperial lookouts, who from the tops of the neighbouring hills are to look out for what foreign ships steer towards the harbour and to give notice of their arrival to the governors of the town. Temples. There are in all 62 temples within and without the town, viz. 5 Shinsha temples erected to the kame, or the gods and idols as of old worshipped in the country. These will be Shinto shrines, I think. Shinsha. 7 temples of the Yamabos, or mountain priests, and 50 Tira, temples of foreign island idols, the worship of whom was brought over from beyond sea. 50 Tera, these are Buddhist temples, aren't they? Of these last, there are 21 within and 29 without the town in the ascent of the hills, with beautiful staircases, beg your pardon, of stone leading up to them. These temples are sacred not only to devotion and worship, but serve also for recreation and diversion, being for this purpose curiously adorned with pleasant gardens, elegant walks, and fine apartments, and by much the best buildings of the town, for good air, a sweet situation, and a most entertaining prospect over the town of Nagasaki itself, and good part of the harbour and adjacent country. A more particular description of these and the like religious buildings I propose to give in the 4th chapter of this book. Bawdy Houses. My next step shall be, according to the custom of the country, from the temples over to the Bawdy Houses, the concourse of people being as great at the latter as it is at the former. That part of the town where they stand is called Keshimatsu, that is the Bawdy Houses quarters. Keshimachi. It lies to the south on a rising hill called Mariam. It consists, according to the Japanese, of 2 streets, which an European would be apt to mistake for more, and which contain the handsomest private buildings of the whole town, all inhabited by boards. This and another place in the province, Chikusen, though not so famous, are the only 2 mariams, as they call them, or public stews in Saikoku, where the poor people of this island, which produces the greatest beauties of all Japan, the women of Miyako only excepted, who are said to exceed them, can dispose of their daughters this way, provided they be handsome and well-shaped. The place accordingly is extraordinarily well furnished, and after that of Miyako, Kyoto, the most famous of the whole empire. The trade being much more profitable here than it is anywhere else, not only because of the great number of foreigners, Nagasaki being the only place they have leave to come to, but also on account of the inhabitants themselves, who are said to be the greatest debauchees and lewdest people in the empire. Gosh. The girls are purchased from their parents when very young. The price varies in proportion to their beauty and the number of years agreed for, which is generally speaking 10 or 20, more or less. Every board keeps as many as he is able in one house together, from 7 to 30. They are very commodiously lodged in handsome apartments, and great care is taken to teach them to dance, sing, play upon musical instruments, to write letters, and in all other respects to qualify them for the way of life they are obliged to lead. The old ones, being more skilful and expert, instruct the young ones, and these in their turn serve them as their mistresses. Those who make considerable improvements in what they are taught, and for their beauty and agreeable behaviour are oftener sent for, to the great advantage of their masters, are also by him better accommodated in clothes and lodging, all at the expense of their lovers, who must pay so much the dearer for their favours. The price paid to their landlord is from 1 mas to 2 ichibi for a night, beyond which they are forbid to ask under severe penalties. One of the sorriest and almost worn by too much use must watch the house overnight in a small room adjoining to the door, where any passenger may have to do with her, paying but 1 mas. Others are sentenced to keep watch by the way of a punishment for their misbehaviour. After having served their time, if they are married, they pass among the common people for honest women, the guilt of their past life being by no means laid to their charge, but that of their parents and relations, who sold them for so scandalous a way of getting a livelihood in their infancy, before they were able to choose a more honest one. Besides, as they are generally well bred, this makes it less difficult for them to get husbands. The boards, on the contrary, though possessed of never so plentiful an estate, are for ever denied admittance in honest companies. They call them by the scandalous name of kachua, which signifies the very worst sort of rabble, and put them upon the same foot with the eta, or leather tanners, the most infamous sort of people in their opinion, who are obliged in this country to do the office of public executioners, and to live out of the town in a separate village not far from the place of execution. The boards are obliged also to send their own servants to assist the yeta at all public executions, or to hire other people to do it. Thus much of the keshimachi. It will not be improper thence to go over to the Gokuja, hell, or as it is otherwise called, roja, the cage. By this they mean the prison, which stands about the middle of the town at the corner of a descending street. It consists of many separate huts and small rooms to accommodate prisoners according to their quality or the crimes they stand committed for. Besides those who are put in prison for crimes committed at Nagasaki, smugglers also are confined there, and persons taken up on suspicion of professing the Christian faith, so that it often contains above 100 prisoners, and though cleared by frequent executions, seldom less than 50. There are within its compass a place where the prisoners are put to the torture, a place for private executions of such persons as are not very notorious malefactors, a kitchen, a place where the prisoners are provided with victuals, a place where at certain times they are permitted to take a walk and to air themselves, and lastly a tange, as they call it, or a pond, for them to wash themselves. Some of the prisoners stand accused of capital crimes, others are taken upon suspicion, others are condemned to perpetual imprisonment. Among the last is the bungo so, as they call it, that is, the rabble of Bungo, by which name they denote the few remaining Christians, of whom there were upwards of 50 confined here when I was in Japan, their women and children computed. Now and then they bring in some more, though but seldom. In the year 1688, 3 were taken up. These poor people are very ignorant of the Christian religion, knowing little more than the name of our Saviour and his Blessed Mother, and yet they are so zealously attached to it that they choose rather to die miserably in gaol than by renouncing their faith, which they are often compelled to do to procure their liberty. It first happened in the month of September 1692 that 3 of the prisoners sent some money to the temples of Amida to pray for the souls of some of their deceased relations. The priests would not receive it without having first asked the governor's advice and leave, nor would the governor determine anything in so nice a case before he had received instructions from the imperial court about it. These Christians, however, are not executed at present, as they were formerly, without mercy, and this in consideration both of their great simplicity and the little necessity there is at this time to show much severity. But they are condemned to end their miserable life in this temporal hell, out of which they are never suffered to stir, never allowed to stir, but when they are carried to the governor's palace, which is done once every 2 months, to be examined there, more indeed out of form than with any rigour, and to be compelled to discover other Christians. All the hours of recreation these poor wretches are allowed are to be taken out of the dungeons they are confined to twice a year, in order to be burnt with moxa, according to the custom of the country, to wash themselves 6 times a year in the tange of the prison, the pond that is, and to take a walk likewise 6 times a year in a large and spacious house built for this purpose within the prison walls. The rest of their miserable time they spend in spinning yarn of hemp for hemming of mats. They stitch their cloths with needles made of bamboos, being denied iron tools. Some know how to make socks and other trifles of this nature. What money they get by their labour and industry is their own, and they may buy some refreshments for it, of which they communicate freely and without reserve to their wives and children, who are kept prisoners in the same jail, though in separate places. It's spelt differently to modern spelling of Gaol. It's Goal, but it's a jail, I think. Out of the remainder of the portion of rice which is allowed them for their daily sustenance, they prepare, by letting it ferment overnight, a particular liquor called amasaki, or the pleasant sake, which for its agreeable sweetness is one of their greatest comforts. They have now and then some cloths sent them by their friends in Bungo, which in this present scarcity of the adherents to the Christian faith, and those 2 Christians more by name than in fact, are somewhat indulged, though they have many a severe censure and examination to undergo. The governors give them every year a mat to lie on. A little while ago, some few of them obtained leave to make use of a kogatan, or small knife, for their work. Kogatana, I suppose. Among the public buildings of Nagasaki, the bridges must not be forgot. There are in all 35, great and small, 20 whereof are built of stone and 15 of wood. There is nothing remarkable in their structure, which is very simple, they being made more for strength than show. The streets in the main are neither straight nor large, but irregular, dirty, narrow, leading some ups, others downhill, because of the irregularity of the ground upon which the town is built. Staircases of stone are built along some of the steepest for a more commodious ascent and descent. They are full stocked with inhabitants, as many as ever they will hold. They are separated from each other by two wooden gates, one at each end, which are shut up at night and often in the day when there is any the least occasion for it. There is besides in every street a kwasi-dogu, as they call it, that is, a place where they keep what is requisite in case of fire, which does a great deal of damage in this country, where all the buildings are made of wood, such as, for instance, a well full of water, a pail or bucket, a fire hook, etc. The ladder is at the disposal of the commanding officer of the street and kept in his house. It must be observed that the streets of Nagasaki and other towns in Japan never run out into too great a length. However, they are not all of the length of a Japanese cho, which is a measure of 60 kins or fathoms, though they have borrowed their name from thence, but they are built so that they may be commodiously shut with gates at each end. Thus, for instance, a street may come up to the full length of a cho and take in some few houses more, which are all under the command of one officer. As to the number of houses, there are seldom more than 60 or less than 30 in a street. The houses of the common people are very mean, sorry buildings, small, low, seldom above 1 story high. If there be 2 stories, the uppermost is so low that it scarce deserves that name. The roof is covered with shavings of fir wood, which are fastened only by other pieces of wood laid across. The houses are built of wood, as are all other buildings throughout the empire. The walls within are wainscoted and hung with painted and variously coloured paper. The floor is covered with mats, wove of a considerable thickness, which they take care to keep exceedingly clean and neat. The rooms are separate from each other by sash windows and paper screens. Seats or chairs they have none, and only some few household goods, chiefly such as are absolutely necessary for daily use in the kitchen. Behind every house is a backyard for secret offices, which, though never so final, yet contains always some curious and beautiful plants to delight the eyes, which they keep with a great deal of care. The houses of eminent merchants, both foreign and natives, and of other rich people, are of a far better structure, commonly 2 stories high and built after the Chinese manner, with a large courtyard before them and a garden behind. Nagasaki is inhabited chiefly by merchants, shopkeepers, tradesmen, handicraftsmen, artificers, brewers, besides the numerous retinue of the governors of the town and the people employed in the Dutch and Chinese trade. There are more poor people and beggars here, and more impudent than anywhere else. Amongst the beggars there are many Kwanshinbos and Kwanshinbikuni, or mendicant friars, and beggar women. One single street, which is called Yawatamachi and sometimes Fachmanmachi, contains upwards of 100. They are poor people who make vow to lead a devout, chaste, and austere life like the priests, in order to which they cause their heads to be shaved and dress themselves in black, like other ecclesiastics, the easier to obtain people's charity. In this dress, with a rosary or beads in their hands, as also with images, small bells, and other marks of an uncommon devotion, they go begging through the town. Some of these devotees are shaved publicly in one of the temples and consecrated to this odd way of life with great solemnity, the priests murmuring certain prayers and obscure words. But this is done only when old rich people resolve to enter into this order and to spend the remainder of their days in their houses in a devout and retired way of life. The monks of the Chinese and other Senshu monasteries send also some of the fraternity to go a-begging 6 times a month, which they do rather pursuant to the vow they make when they are admitted into the order, to follow the example of their great founder and patron Shaka, than out of any want or necessity. Dogs. The dogs also deserve to be mentioned among the inhabitants of Nagasaki, they being full as well, nay better maintained, and taken care of than many of the rest, and although the imperial orders on this head are not regarded and complied with at Nagasaki with that strictness as they must be in other parts of the empire which are not so remote from the court, yet the streets lie full of these animals, leading a most easy and quiet life, giving way neither to men nor horses. If they happen to hurt anybody, or otherwise to do mischief, so as to deserve punishment or death, nobody dares presume to touch them, but the public executioner, and not even he without a direct order from the governors. Huts are built in every street to keep such as grow old and infirm, and when they die, they must be carried up to the tops of the mountains in order to be buried. This uncommon care and regard for the preservation of the dog kind is the effect of a superstitious whim of the now reigning emperor, who, being born in the sign of the dog, hath no less an esteem for this animal than the great Roman emperor Augustus Caesar is mentioned in history to have had for rams. I have elsewhere related the comical conversation of two Japanese who were carrying up a dead dog to the top of a mountain in order to his burial. Manufactures, in the main, are not so good at Nagasaki as they are in other parts of the empire, and yet everything is sold dearer, chiefly to foreigners. However, what is wrought in gold, silver, and sawars, being not so proper a commodity for the inland trade as it is for the foreign, is made here with a much better taste, and of a far more curious workmanship than I believe anywhere else. As to victuals and drink, the country about Nagasaki doth not produce rice enough, which is the common food all over Asia, for the sustenance of its inhabitants, so that the necessary provisions must be imported from the neighbouring provinces of Fisen, Figo, and Chikungo, and from the islands Amakusa and Goto, which lie to the north of this town. The gardens in and about this city, the neighbouring mountains and villages, abundantly furnish it with all sorts of fruits, plants and roots, with firewood, as also with some venison and poultry. The harbour and neighbouring shores yet yield plenty of fish and crabs. The rivers which run through the town provide it with clear and sweet water, very fit for the daily drink. The sake, or rice beer, as it is brewed in Japan, being too strong, and that in particular which is brewed at Nagasaki of a disagreeable taste. Another light and clear water springs forth on the neighbouring mountain, Tatta. The ships in the harbour take in their store of water from a clear spring, not far from the town to the east of it. The water, though it is very good and clear, as indeed the water is in all parts of the empire, yet it hath been observed to give people the colic or bellyache, a distemper which the inhabitants themselves are very much subject to, chiefly when they drink their sake cold, and in too large a quantity. The town is never without a great deal of noise. In the daytime, victuals and other merchandise are cried up and down the streets. Day labourers encourage one another to work with a certain sound. The seamen in the harbour measure the progress of their work according to another loud tune. In the night time, the watchmen and soldiers, upon duty both in the streets and harbour, show their vigilance, and at the same time indicate the hours of the night by beating two strong pieces of wood one against the other. That is still done in Japan. I've heard it recently. The Chinese also contribute their share, chiefly in the evening, when they burn some pieces of gilt paper and throw them into the sea as an offering or sacrifice to their idol Matsubosa, or when they carry the said idol about its temple, both which they do with beating of drums and cymbals. But all this is little in comparison to the clamour and bawling of the priests and relations of dying or dead persons, who either in the house where the corpse lies, or else upon certain days sacred to the deceased's memory, sing a namanda with a loud voice and ringing of bells for the relief of his soul. Namanda is a short prayer contracted from the words Namu Amida Buddhu, and directed to their god Amida, whom they pray to intercede with the supreme judge of the infernal court in favour of the poor condemned soul. The like is done by the Nimbutsuko certain fraternities or societies of devout neighbors, friends, or relations who meet by turns in their houses every day in the morning or evening in order to sing the Namanda by way of precaution for the future relief of their own souls. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is about the government of Nagasaki, but I will not read that now. I've read quite enough today. Thank you. I'll stop the share. I will put the reference to where you can download KAEMPFER'S History of Japan in the description to this video. All right. So thank you very much for listening. If you have, I'm not sure that I pronounced every word absolutely correctly. Certainly the names are a bit difficult. But I think by and large you can see that the English employed is not so formidably different or frighteningly different from modern English. And I hope that might encourage you to perhaps take a look at a little bit more of KAEMPFER on your own. All right. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop the recording.